Joaquin Phoenix is too old and is also kind of ugly to play Napoleon. Napoleon was known for his aura of command, the fact that he could inspire people to line up to die for him. And most importantly, Napoleon was young. That's what has set him apart so much from his contemporaries. His story and his legend are so alien to the modern bugman that he tries to humanize Napoleon. But can you humanize a force of nature? The entire aim of this movie was to say that Napoleon was nothing more than a loser simping for a mid who just happened to be at the right place at the right time. They want to say, look here man, your great general of history was nothing more than a cuck and a sexual deviant. The only reason he had any ambition was because of sexual frustration. They want to say that if he attained glory, it's only because of his entrapment with women, either his wife, Josephine, or his mother. Hell, the Barbie movie had more masculine energy than Napoleon. But fear not, this video exists to correct the flaws of this dreadful movie. Most people don't know this, but Napoleon was a man out of his time. And I mean that even in the context of his own life. Napoleon was a great man in modern times. People of his own time were shocked into submission by seeing a meteor in human form, or they were seduced into following him as he had the aura of destiny about him. But instead of focusing on such higher concepts as destiny, they could have instead just focused on his military achievements. They could have focused on his ability to inspire devotion and maddening loyalty. They could have focused on his military and economic reforms. They could have focused on his ability to bend entire armies to his will, whether his own or his enemies. They could have focused on his victory at Jena or his maneuvering at Borodino. But no, instead they just focus on Josephine. 60% of the movie is freaking Josephine. And this is the most boring and uninteresting part of his life. Napoleon could have been such a phenomenal movie. This could be the movie that defined the genre of historical films going forward. But instead they chose to make it a shitty B drama. They could have at the very least shown off the opulence of the French court. They could have shown off the architecture of that time, but no, they chose to put this gray-blue filter on the entire movie, making the entire movie looks kind of cold and dreary. It's almost like they want us to believe that the past was this dark and dismal place. This is not true. There was far more beauty in the past. It's only now that our art is polluted and our architecture fails to create any kind of inspiration in us. So let us look at Napoleon more closely and let us use history and philosophy to guide us into understanding the story. Napoleon is an example of a real-life superhero. He was the manifestation of the spirit of the French people. I have a belief that Napoleon was the avatar of the French people at that time. He embodied their pride and tactical brilliance and amplified it to the maximum, but he also amplified the sexual freedoms, let's say, of the French people. So when I say Napoleon was a man of the people, I mean this very literally. He was the personification of the French population at that time. Their entire hopes, dreams, and frustrations came to be in the embodiment of this one man. And this happens quite a few times in history. Caesar was the embodiment of the tyrannical and hero-worshipping aspect of the Roman people. And Ashoka was the embodiment of the Hindu and Buddhist philosophies brought to rule. But of course, I do not expect a modern Hollywood movie to ponder on these deep topics. And I do not expect them to be able to place so much agency in their own characters. All protagonists, especially if they are male, are made to be almost mentally handicapped in order to make them more humanized and more believable. For example, the latest James Bond, they literally gave him PTSD for no reason. We watch Bond as an archetype. And that's exactly the case with Napoleon. Napoleon is to be seen as an archetype. He's to be seen as a force of nature, not a man. We want to draw inspiration and raw power from him, but instead we have this. Of course, this goes against the Hollywood narrative. This is why Napoleon fails while a movie like 300 shines. But of course, a movie like 300 will never be made again because it shows the ravening appetites of well-trained men. And the movie doesn't even mention Napoleon's marshals. How dared they make a movie about Napoleon without talking about his generals, his marshals? Marshal Ney, Murat, Bernadotte, Oudinot, and Davout. These were celebrities in their own right. These were men who were praised across France as much as Napoleon was. And we don't even get a mention of their names. Instead, we get a 60% of the movie dedicated to Josephine. Does Napoleon's success come from his highly talented generals and marshals, or does it come from the source between Josephine's legs? The movie doesn't talk about how Napoleon knew his soldiers by name. He would go among the ranks, among the lowest ranked soldiers, know them by name, know their family history, ask them about their daughters, ask them about their hopes and aspirations. And it wasn't just simple soldiers. The greatest artists of his time, writers, poets, would orbit around Napoleon like planets around a star. But the movie doesn't even attempt to explain this magnitude. And of course, Joaquin Phoenix is the complete wrong choice for the lead role for this movie. Napoleon was not a crusty, old-looking dude who looks like he needs a shower. We need a handsome young youth, a man of power and charisma who looks as though he could inspire people to follow him onto death. I have nothing against JP as an actor. It's just that he looks broken and worn down, which makes sense for movies like Joker where he was phenomenal. It does not make sense for Napoleon, because Napoleon was not broken. He was a man above his peers. I could imagine a situation where men are following Joaquin Phoenix's character into battle. He's so dour and uncharismatic. But speaking of which, the battle scenes were pretty cool. They showed only 2 battles. They only showed Austerlitz and Waterloo. And both the battles felt really short, almost like the battles were the interruption from the main storyline, which was Napoleon and Josephine. Still, the battles were good. I'm going to give credit where it's due. The Battle of Austerlitz was really cool. It's cool to see how Napoleon sunk his enemies by opening up the frozen lake under their feet using cannon fire. There's also a scene near the start of the movie where Napoleon uses grape shot against his own French citizens. And this is how the director should have undercut the hero narrative of Napoleon. See, I don't think Napoleon was a good guy. Napoleon was not the good guy. If you wanted to show Napoleon as the villain of the story, you could absolutely do that. You are more than free to show Napoleon as capricious, tyrannical, overambitious, evil even. You can absolutely make Napoleon to be seen as a nemesis of mankind. This is all a reasonable approach. What is not a reasonable approach is to make him seem like a bumbling idiot who only cares about and he only has success because he was at the right time and right place. This is not reasonable. So that scene when Napoleon opens fire on his own French people, this is historically accurate, and this does show what lengths Napoleon would go to achieve success. But the scene was cut short and doesn't have the impact it should have had. See, if you wanted to show Napoleon as a conflicted figure, an egomaniac, and as a power-hungry tyrant, you absolutely could do that. And that would be a legitimate way to show Napoleon was not somebody to emulate. That's fine. But instead they show him as a puppet cuck to his wife Josephine. And the movie also did one more good thing. It showed the irony of the French Revolution. So the French Revolution, for those who do not know, was a revolution in which the monarchy of France was deposed and replaced by a people's rule. And this went just about as well as you'd expect. The people's rule was even more brutal and bloody than the monarchy ever was. So the monarchy was a strict hierarchy, and when the people's rule came to be, they tried to make it as though everybody was equal and there was perfect egalitarian society. Didn't quite happen like that. And this led to many ironic moments. For example, when Josephine's son, not Napoleon's son, Josephine had a son before Napoleon, he asks Napoleon for his father's sword as a memorabilia. And Napoleon explains that citizens aren't allowed to hold weapons in this new France. And this reminded me of the Sengoku Jidai period in Japan. As soon as power was consolidated in the hands of a few, the first thing which they always do is to confiscate the weaponry of the citizens. This is a very common tactic which all tyrants use. So understand this. The freedom of the American people is not in the First Amendment, but rather in the Second. But speaking of the French Revolution, the American Revolution was actually happening at a similar time. So why did the French Revolution fail so abysmally while the American Revolution succeeded? It's because of one man. And this brings us to the theories of history. And that one single man, that one singular man was George Washington. There are 2 views of looking at history. One is the great man view of history. This says that great men, singular men at the appropriate times, basically dictated the course of history. The opposite view, the Marxist view, is that grand socio-economic changes is what drives history, and any of these names from history, Napoleon, Caesar, Alexander, etc., these are just leaves upon the stream of history. This notion I reject. History is made by individuals. The fact that the American Revolution did not follow the same trajectory as the French Revolution comes down to the actions and ethics of that one man, General George Washington. He was a man who was entirely uncorruptible, and he chose by himself to abdicate power rather than hold it for himself. On the other hand, the movie shows Napoleon to be a bumbling idiot who just happens to luck out every now and then. But this is completely inaccurate. Napoleon was not at the right place at the right time. he made the right place and the right time. So Napoleon failed, you say. Napoleon didn't achieve what he set out to. And he got exiled. Yeah, in fact, he got exiled twice. And even in here, there is a learning lesson. After his disastrous campaign in Russia, speaking of disaster campaigns, the movie completely neglects to mention his campaign in Spain. They completely don't even mention that Napoleon sent his armies to Spain. Of course, that's a story unto itself. So Napoleon met with some serious opposition in the Iberian Peninsula. Got his ass kicked, really. But we don't want to talk about that. We just want to talk about Josephine, apparently, in this movie. And this is so pathetic, man. Napoleon's generals were such charismatic leaders on their own right. Each of them was a crazy character, and each of them were so different from each other. You could create an entire movie about each of Napoleon's marshals. But no, they weren't even mentioned by name. Instead, 60% of the damn runtime was given over to Josephine. Josephine's only contribution to history was to be a slut. But even in defeat, there are learning lessons to be had. Elba was a small little fishing village. It was an island, and they exiled Napoleon to basically be in confinement over there. And you know what? They retired him. When Napoleon met with defeat in Russia and came back, they gave him 2 million francs per year to just go and retire in Elba. He could have literally just gone to Elba, lived his life out, and relaxed. But no, he was a man of titanic energy. There was no such thing as stillness for this man. Instead, he actually took control of the island of Elba and developed it. So Elba was just a random sleepy little fishing town. But after Napoleon came, he modernized that little village. The same little sleepy town which was existing in that same exact state of stasis for probably hundreds of years now became a modern village because of Napoleon's presence and his aura of command, his ability to strategize, his ambitions for his people around him. That's what I mean when I say a single man can make all the difference. This man literally couldn't stop himself from developing the people around him. And then he escaped.
I say, I am Napoleon. I am Emperor.
Napoleon escaped from his exile from the island of Elba and came back to the French mainland. And every single monarch in Europe collectively shit themselves at his arrival. The French monarchy. So what happened was, when Napoleon was deposed, they reinstalled the French monarchy. And this French monarchy sent army after army to destroy Napoleon before he can come to Paris. And they all failed because as soon as they saw the man who they fought for and who fought with them, they wouldn't be able to fire upon him. Rather, they would actually change their side. They would defect and they would join Napoleon. And there is a scene about this in the movie, but it's so brief, it's almost forgettable. This is the aura of Napoleon, man. This is the thing which Napoleon is known for. His aura of presence and command. The idea that he could go up to an army and say, hey boys, I know you know me. I know you recognize me. I fought by you in every single battle that we were in. Why would you point your guns towards me? Why not join me? Let's take France back and make it great again. That was what Napoleon stood for. And every army did defect. They joined Napoleon. Instead of the armies destroying him, each army made Napoleon stronger and stronger until he had built up, well, he didn't rebuild his entire army, right? But he built up a decent enough force. And every other monarch in Europe had to combine forces to deal with Napoleon. He was outnumbered something like 3-1 or something like that. Something terrible. This movie does a terrible job of showing why Napoleon inspired such levels of devotion. It doesn't even try to explain it. And this is the mystique. This is the challenge. The director has completely missed out on the challenge of Napoleon. The idea of Napoleon and Josephine and him being a cuckold and everything, that's the easy way out. That's the easy and boring and lame part of Napoleon's life, which is very easy to portray in a movie. The challenge is to portray Napoleon's charisma. The challenge is to portray Napoleon's power of inspiration. How do you do that on the screen? And that's a real challenge. The movie completely fails to deliver upon the vision of the loyalty and brotherhood within the French army, and of course, their allegiance to the Emperor of France, Napoleon. And so for all these reasons, I give this movie a 1 French bearskin hat out of 5. If you enjoyed this, it's more than likely that you'll enjoy my review on movie 300, a movie that some people think is historically inaccurate, but is actually completely authentic to the mindset of the Greeks at that time. Or perhaps you will want to watch my review on the Barbie movie, which ironically is more masculine than the Napoleon movie. I'll have these tiles pop up shortly. Go ahead and watch if you so please.